This is Newsfeed, the AM edition. I'm Ayanda Nyati. Thanks very much for starting your day with us. Now, the continued spread of the coronavirus on the African continent has put a damper on forecasts of economic growth. The recent ratification of the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement has put pressure on the continent's leaders to work together to contain the outbreak. How they succeed will determine whether Africa can unite in its increase intra-Africa trade. Victor Hobeswana is Africa business commentator. He joins us now in studio to explore this issue in a bit more detail. Victor, always great getting your insights. Welcome back to Newsroom Africa.
Good to see you, Anna. Good to see you again.
Let's start by, just exploring the connections, right, between the spread of coronavirus and intra-Africa trade. Right. You say this is a litmus test to see how well we'll be able to do this. Tell us why.
True. Because, in sport, when you play, you learn a technique. This is how you swing your tennis racket. And you've seen how they will keep hitting to the same side. Because when you get exhausted or when you're under pressure, your technique will fail. So if South Africa or Africa as a whole has any systems to combat infections, even if it's there under pressure of something like coronavirus, it will crack if it's not well entrenched. So that is the point that I'm listening. Uganda was forced to send some people, foreign nationals, home because they refused to self-isolate. And South Africa, as you know, we've been talking. People have been taking on the government and saying, how did these people even get in through our borders?
Right.
That story you mentioned in the news headlines about Sinai. Sinai is in the parts of Egypt where it's all tourism. Now, if you say one German tourist died, what does that tell you? The question is, do we have a way of tracking these things? Do we have a way of detecting early and self-isolating, quarantining where we need to? But most of all, do we have a way of updating our people on what to expect? In other words, if I asked you, is there a television channel, a news bulletin, or any slot on any given day that all Africans are communicating the stats about coronavirus? That's what we call system.
It's called Newsroom Africa, Victor. Where have you been? We've been around the boundary.
Exactly. Well, I'm glad you're doing it. I missed it. But I'm saying, what I'm saying is anywhere on the continent, by now there should be a hotline, one hotline that but hotline is meaning you must call. I'm talking about where if we do political updates during elections, and we know at this time you have political school or you have this, do we have a regular slot across Africa? It's not about just one channel doing it. It's about Africa because all Africans are intermingling. They're traveling to one another's country and they are interacting. So it's more about a system rather than just one exception. If you are the exception, I'm glad, but are you the norm or are you the exception?
Sure. And, a lot of people are suggesting that even posing questions like, is Africa ready, are sort of laced with an Afro-pessimism, right? Suggesting that perhaps this isn't the case. And that's mostly because the questioning of the state of readiness isn't as frequent in, other nations, such as the Northern Hemisphere, where it's assumed that
this is not the time
of readiness.
This is not the time to question Afro-pessimism. When coronavirus hits, it doesn't care if you're Afro-pessimistic or Afro-optimistic. I'm the most Afro-optimistic person you'll come across. But I'm telling you now, I've had children in South Africa dying because nursing professionals or healthcare professionals were not disinfecting as they should. That's got nothing to do with Afro-pessimism or racism. It's got to do with whether people understand basic hygiene. And basic hygiene is not a political or anything. It's just about, do you know how to stop infections from spreading? And I agree that some people know and others don't. But again, coronavirus is about people meeting. And because it's a droplet infection, which means any surface where an infected person goes might be infected unless you have your systems spot on. You are risking killing people, and I'm not interested in asking whether this is a question. If Europeans are happy that they are foolproof, I'm okay with it. I'm talking about my people here on the African continent.
And it's difficult to talk about the people in the African continent and not bring in issues around governance and policies and the rest of it, which obviously have a bearing on whether or not we'll be able to contain the spread of the virus itself.
Which is an issue here in South Africa. When you turn on the news, you are the newsman. When you turn on the news, you talk about systems, you talk about institutions coming under political pressure, right? And when systems and institutions are under political pressure, it means professionals cannot make decisions unhindered.
Yeah.
And when professionals can't make decisions unhindered, something's got to give.
Which does raise the questions then about a responsible way to move forward, given all our challenges in the country, right? So experts have long sort of suggested that it's a matter of when the virus begins to spread as opposed to if.
Yeah.
The remnants are already showing their faces as we speak now. What kind of responsible diplomatic relations should be unfolding across the continent now, considering already the signs that we're seeing?
Let's first of all admit where the systems are weak. If there are weaknesses, let's admit to them. It's not going to be about labeling or dissing anybody. It's about admitting that there's a loophole here. And once we have admitted, this is an emergency. It's like any war. In a war situation, you talk about defense first, keeping people safe, those that are at risk, isolate, but let's work as a unit. Maybe, Ayanda, it could be an opportunity for Africans to learn to work together. Perhaps that intra-Africa trade will be following on the trails of the collaboration around something as tragic as the coronavirus outbreak.
Although, there are moments in history that suggest to us how we're likely to treat this.
Yeah.
And one of those is the Ebola outbreak in the DRC.
Yeah.
And you're taking a bit of a sigh right now because it almost, at least to my perception, was a situation where the DRC was see to finish. Left to its own devices. It felt as if, South Africa, for instance, wasn't being affected, and so there wasn't really much collaboration. What lessons, if any, do we take from how the Ebola crisis was?
Yeah, well, I actually give Nigerians a lot of credit because there were lots of solutions that were found to Ebola in Nigeria by Nigerians. The problem with the DRC is a special case. The DRC shares a border with 9 other countries, and it's all in the north, in the east, in the west, and in the south. Therefore, anything that happens in the DRC is likely to affect all those countries. And because the DRC itself was a country in transit, its systems were weak. It was not easy for the neighboring countries to collaborate. And that's why, if you recall, Rwanda to the east just closed this border.
Yeah.
You see what I mean? But it shouldn't be a Rwanda closing its border. It should be all 9 countries surrounding DRC that should have come together almost immediately and then say, we are affected whether we like it or not. Where are the loopholes? Where are the regular movements? Can we test and isolate and do quarantining? But that's what I'm saying. Often a crisis like that exposes you, but also if you are willing to learn and you are responsive, it might be an opportunity for you to shape up. And this is another opportunity. I agree, the Ebola was almost like the DRC is left to its own, but it's because it is itself, it was at that time a country that was dysfunctional, if you like. And now if you're dysfunctional and you have so many border posts and so much movement that's unregulated and so much violence, you are likely to not be helped, or you are likely to not be able to receive help even if you wanted to. And the DRC is huge,
Yeah.
So it's something that we must not underestimate. It's a huge country, and without road infrastructure, which is even more difficult.
And that, I guess, already raises areas of concern that we could be focusing on. Let's speak about South Africa's positionality in all of this, right? Typically, for better or for worse, the country's looked at as having some of the solutions, or at least the resources to implement the solutions. One of the biggest advantages now is that we currently, the chair of the AU, and of course, the secretary of the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement is also a South African. How can we use that to the advantage not only of the country, but certainly of the continent as well?
I cannot say I know for sure, but the ceremonial position of President Ramaphosa as the chair of the African Union is an opportunity here, because ceremonial means he doesn't have executive or day-to-day responsibility, which means he could use this as a flagship project. Not only is he the ceremonial chair of the African Union, but a South African, Wamkele Mene, is the Secretary General in Accra, which means you have the ceremonial and the technocratic responsibility. I would say it depends on President Ramaphosa really and his advisors. I know he has appointed a former Nigerian minister, Okonjo Iweala, as one of the economic advisors. Because I look at this outbreak as an economic issue, perhaps that's an opportunity, but I can't say I know for sure how he could do it. It's all about saying, Tumamina, he likes to say that. So maybe here's a real crisis. I want to be there when the Africans win against coronavirus. That's something that would really resonate with the entire continent and maybe give him an opportunity to uplift the image of South Africa, because in some areas, we are seen as being an aloof country that considers itself apart from the rest of the African. People still talk about, I'm going to Africa, which means we are somewhere else.
Right.
Perhaps this is an opportunity for him. But as to what he could do, I would say in the same spirit of Tumamina that he started his term of office on, he should say, here's coronavirus. I want to be there when the people turn it around. And let's see if he can help Africa turn it around.
You're absolutely right. I mean, the issue of South African exceptionalism in the academic space is one that's been spoken about for quite some time, where, it does seem as though South Africa is an extension of Europe at the tip of Africa, but I guess that's a whole different conversation.
We are too far from Europe to be an extension.
But
I know what you mean.
Yeah,
maybe we could be an extension of Australia or something.
Very quickly, you've already mentioned how the DRC had particular challenges because there was a government in transition. And instantly I thought about Sudan, where there are similar type of contexts. It does raise questions about areas of concern that we might have on the continent. Yeah. Any that come to mind for you?
You don't want to be in South Sudan at this point, because here's a country that until maybe a week or two ago did not have its president. His president was in other countries, Ethiopia, Kenya, South Africa, anywhere else but in his own country. The same with his deputy. They are only now trying to make the government of national unity work, which is tragic because they were deputy and president in 2013 when this trouble started. They spent all these 5-6 years elsewhere fighting goodness knows for what. And now they're back exactly where they were. But what I'm saying is people have been dying by thousands anyway on any given day due to violence. Coronavirus, I assume, will be the least of their worries. As difficult as that it is to accept. But if you're worried about whether your neighbor is going to hack you to death, I'm sure coronavirus will be a much more congenial issue to deal with. But it's exactly the illustration of what I'm saying, that if systems are in place, it's a lot easier to act. Now, if the commander-in-chief has only come back to the country after living elsewhere for 5 years plus, what more will there be an opportunity to work on a system to fight coronavirus? My heart bleeds for people in that part of the world.
Yeah, and this is not consoling, but at least now we know. Thank you very much for your insights and for coming through. Always a pleasure being in conversation with you. That's Victor Swana, who's Africa Business Commentator, live to us here.